Okay then. I guess we are functioning here. We appear to be recording, which is good. Hello and welcome to question and answer number 170. I'm your host, Panyo Basa, and this is my beverage. And I've gotten up really early to do this. It's like I've gotten into this routine now of doing Q&As like after I get up on Sunday and then uploading them on Sunday instead of recording them on Saturday and uploading them early in the morning, like 11:15 on Sunday. And so I got up because we have to go somewhere at 3:30, so I got to be done before 3:30 in the afternoon. So I just got up at this god-awful time. This is the earliest I have gotten up in a long time. It was actually morning when I got up. It wasn't even noon yet. It was still practically the middle of the night because I work nights now. It's like I come home from work like 2 in the morning, and then usually we stay up until after 4. You know, you get up afternoon, sometimes just a little afternoon, but still. My sweetie's not even up yet, which is why the beard remains unbraided. So, I gotta answer these questions here. I got up just for you guys. Let's see if I can do this. I used to amaze my friends when I was a kid by making farting sounds when I rubbed my hands together. So let's see. I suppose I should just dive right into this. Oh, I forgot to say, though, that 170 obviously is not a prime number. It is, let's see, 2 times 5 times 17. That's a pretty easy one. So I suppose I should just commence to answering questions here. And the first question is from Tynan. And Tynan says, in reference to the self that does not exist, is this referring to the I self that narrates in our minds that identifies as and with this and that? Well, not necessarily. I mean, that would be included, I suppose. But the I self that narrates in our minds, I mean, just the narration itself, the Theravada Buddhists, I mean, depends on how you look at it, if they would include that as the self. I mean, in Theravada Buddhism, Orthodox Theravada, like Abhidhamma philosophy, the commentarial tradition and so forth, mental states are real. It's just that to have that there's this individual person that is generating these mental states is the self that does not exist. The mental states really do arise and all that due to causes, but that itself is not the self. Just mental states themselves or consciousness itself is not the self that is denied. But the self that is denied is like an ultimately real separated individuality that is like a conscious being. From the point of view of Theravada Buddhism, that would be the self. Although in some schools of Mahayana Buddhism, and I'm inclined to go along with these schools of Mahayana Buddhism with regard to this, that the self would be any kind of separate individual entity, conscious or not, subject or object, that there's just nothing that is inherently separate and distinct from the rest of the universe. So, let's see here. I just woke up a little while ago, so you got to bear with me, at least the first couple questions when I'm like getting some momentum going. So, yeah, I mean, from the Theravada Buddhist point of view, it's sort of like a subjective self, but it's not necessarily just mental states arising. It would be like this, the conceit I am. So, you know, it'd be like the ego. Although, again, from the Mahayana point of view, even this cup would be a non-existent self because it's just not like ultimately distinct from the rest of the universe. Almost tried to inhale the coffee instead of drinking it, which is not advisable. So let's see here. Did I answer that question? It seems like I answered it too concisely. If I answer a question too quickly, there's a certain feeling of insecurity, like being the first person to hand in a test. Let's see. I guess I answered that question. So I'm just going to move on to Tainen's next question. And he says, would you say Mara is the personification of the ego? And I don't think that was the intention. That to some degree, I mean, Mara is like egotistical, he's got a big ego and all that. But I don't think that he is the personification of the ego. I mean, Mara literally means like killer. That Mara, just going with, Indo-European languages, that M-A-R in Mara is essentially the same as the M-O-R in mortal or the M-U-R in murder. This just means death. He is death. He's sort of like the guy on the beach that the knight is contending with in Ingmar Bergman's movie, The Seventh Seal. That would be Mara, essentially. He is death. But he's also just the god. He's like the overlord of samsara. So he's like the personification of samsara more than the personification of the ego. Although, of course, the ego is generated, or ego and samsara, in a way they're sort of mutually dependent upon each other. It's all part of the same package deal of unenlightenment. So you could say indirectly, he's kind of a personification of the ego, but that really wasn't the original idea. That he was just sort of the overlord of samsara that's trying to keep people from becoming enlightened. And if he can't get you to be bad, he'll get you to be good, because even the heaven realms are within his realm of samsara. All 31 planes of existence, with Nibbana not being on that list, are samsara, and at least to some degree, you could say they are Mara's realm, even though Mara lives in the highest realm of the sensuous sphere. It's the heaven realm of the deities who delight in the creations of others. If I remember correctly. So I think I'm just going to move on to the next question. And this is from Fred. And Fred is a peculiar guy sometimes. And his first question is kind of peculiar, also a little probingly personal. He says, do you have a tattoo on your willy? And I don't have any tattoos at all. It's just, I just never liked the idea. I'm kind of a minimalist. And it's sort of like when I was young or younger, just the idea that to make your mind up with regard to what you want to be when you grow up, it just immediately cancels out all other possibilities. So it's like when you've committed yourself to getting a tattoo of like the anchor or the heart that says mom on it, on your bicep or whatever, then, I mean, that's it. I mean, you can't, that has, like, you have collapsed the state vector of all the possibilities. And it's just kind of limiting or whatever. And so I just never really liked the idea of getting a tattoo. My brother has several tattoos. My father had one on his arm, lest I forget. And my sweetheart, she has occasionally brought up the issue of us getting tattoos, sort of matching tattoos. But I really not, I mean, I'm kind of open-minded on the subject, but yeah, I mean, I won't even tell you about the joke my father had about willy tattoos, but he had this tattoo joke about Fred's question here, but I won't go into details, but it has something to do with a dime metamorphosing into a silver dollar. So no, I don't have any tattoos at all, and that's fine. My sweetheart, being of a younger era, slightly younger era than me, came from a time when pretty much everybody got tattoos, even like virgins got tattoos. But yeah, and then I lived in Burma for many years, where even, village damsels can have some dainty little Buddhist protection symbol tattooed on their wrist or some such thing. So I'm just going to move on to Fred's second question, which is a little more Dhamma oriented. He says, if Nibbana is blowing out and oblivion, is it worth pursuing and can it be achieved? Well, Nibbana is blowing out like a fire blows out. And the ancient Indians had different concepts of fire than like modern Westerners have. Like in ancient India, fire was a god. It was Agni. And Agni, Agni, has the same etymology of like English words like ignite or igneous, like an igneous rock. So it wasn't really oblivion. I mean, fire was a god. Fire, Agni was like the messenger between like humans and the gods. You'd send your offerings to the gods through the fire sacrifice. And Agni was the fire. And when a fire went out, it didn't just disappear, or it didn't cease to exist so much as it just went into like an unmanifest state. The fire was always kind of latent. And like medieval alchemy, medieval proto-physics had this idea like combustible materials would contain this substance called phlogiston that was like fire, the potential of fire contained within wood and coal and all that. And the Indians had kind of a similar idea that fire just becomes like unmanifest and kind of latent or potential when it wasn't actually burning as a flame. And so you could call it oblivion just from a samsaric point of view, but it doesn't mean that it ceases to exist. It's just kind of becomes unmanifest. So Nibbana is metaphorically blowing out, and from a samsaric perspective, you could call it oblivion, even though from the ultimate perspective it is not. Then is it worth pursuing and can it be achieved? Yeah, it'd still be, it's obviously worth pursuing. It's like the whole goal of Buddhism. At least Nibbana is, regardless of exactly how you define it. Any definition you give is going to be inadequate anyway. And somebody just came to our front door, and I'm ignoring them because we got to do this. I'm doing this for you guys. So, is Nibbana worth pursuing, and can it be achieved? It's obviously worth pursuing. Can it be achieved? That's kind of a trick question. I mean, from the Buddhist point of view, the answer obviously is yes. Yeah, Nibbana can be achieved. There have been enlightened beings, but to call it like something that is got, that kind of thing, it's just an inadequate. Any kind of language about Nibbana or Nirvana is going to be inadequate and just kind of logically invalid because it's just beyond language. And you try and capture it with words, and it just doesn't work that way. So I think I'm just going to move on to Fred's third question, which is the oblivion of deep sleep equivalent to Nibbana without the re-emergence to consciousness? And I remember when I was staying at Pandita Rama, back when Venerable Mahasi U Pandita was still alive, he actually declared that Nibbana is like deep sleep. And his teacher, Mahasi Sayadaw, used to say this also. So it's not really a tenet of Orthodox Theravada, but it seems to be a tenet of the Mahasi tradition, at least back in the 1990s when I was at Pandita Rama, that deep sleep is about as close to Nibbana as you can get. And there are some Upanishads that talk about like the three levels of consciousness: waking consciousness, dreaming consciousness, and deep sleep. And then there's at least one Upanishad that refers to the fourth, which would be like the enlightened mind. But I'm just kind of digressing here. Is the oblivion of deep sleep equivalent to Nibbana? I mean, Nibbana is awakening. The Buddha literally means awakened. So how is it that like enlightenment or awakening would resemble deep sleep more than it even resembles waking consciousness. And I was thinking that at the time, that when U Pandita was saying, that Nibbana is like deep sleep, it's like, no, it's really not. I mean, how is awakening equivalent to deep sleep? Also, if you're in a deep sleep, you can still get woken up. So it's not total oblivion. If you're in a deep sleep, somebody can still wake you up because you're still conscious. That's something a lot of people don't realize. They think that when they're asleep, they're just unconscious. But even when you're sleeping, you still have this awareness. If you didn't have the awareness, you'd be in a coma and nobody would be able to wake you up. They could just throw cold water on you. You wouldn't feel it because you'd be in this oblivion. But enlightenment, no, it's not. It's not similar to deep sleep, in my opinion. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Romeo. And Romeo says, are there any Theravada Buddhist temples near where you live in South Carolina? And actually, it is my understanding that there is a Theravada Buddhist temple right here in town. But it's bhikkhunis. It's the new bhikkhunis. And it's apparently they're somehow, the place there is somehow under the patronage of some Sri Lankan monk who I don't think lives there. I think it's sort of like this little house convent place with a few of these new bhikkhunis living there. So that's the only Theravada Buddhist place I know of. There is a Vietnamese Mahayana temple somewhere in this area that I've heard about, but again, I've just heard about them. So I've never been to these places. So Romeo's second question is, if so, with regard to, are there any Theravada Buddhist temples near where I live? If so, do you sometimes stop by and pay them a visit for a meditation and or Dhamma talk? And no, I've never been to any Buddhist temples in South Carolina. And the main reason why I don't, my experience with like temples, Theravada Buddhist temples in the West has not been entirely positive. They tend to be kind of degenerate in certain ways. I mean, even like temples in Burma, Buddhist temples in Burma, like monasteries, they're also pretty degenerate in certain ways. So my Buddhist practice, my following of Dhamma, generally avoided monasteries. I mean, I'd live at a monastery, but like I'd be living on the outskirts of a monastery, or I'd be like the only monk at the monastery. Like the one monastery I lived at longer than any other place, for most of the time I was living there, I was living in a cave up on the hill, and there was one old monk living down by the river in a hut. And then he got bitten by a cobra and died, and then I was the only monk there for a while. And then finally there was like young Burmese monks that kind of heard about me and wanted to practice with me or wanted to learn from me or something. They started moving in. And then I eventually moved out. So, yeah, I mean, I've never really been monastery-centric in my Buddhism, other than just kind of the necessity of a monk living at monastery in certain circumstances. Like when I first came back to America, I was like in 2011, I was really trying to be a monk in America that wasn't living in a monastery. Just sort of like couch surfing, that kind of thing. And I mean, it worked while it was working, but it just wasn't really sustainable. It just didn't work out in the long run. So, and then if I were to visit these bhikkhunis, it would have to be, it would slip out at some point or another that I really don't consider them to be genuine bhikkhunis. They're lay women wearing robes with shaved heads, in my opinion. I do not think that bhikkhuni ordination in Theravada really is legit. And so, yeah, I mean, just going there would be already kind of getting into the danger zone for me. And the Sri Lankan monk, I'm not even sure where he lives. I don't think he's living there with the bhikkhunis. So it may be that he started the place and then got like a different place and moved on. And then the bhikkhunis eventually, because it's politically correct and everything to support bhikkhunis, they got maybe a better place, and just the Sri Lankan monk is kind of like a distant patron or something. So, yeah, I do not sometimes stop by. I've never been to any Buddhist temple or monastery in South Carolina since I've lived here. So, I'm just going to move on to Romeo's third question, which is, if not, then how do you maintain a connection with your Buddhist spirituality? Well, I mean, it's internal for the most part. I mean, that's kind of the way I maintain a connection with my Buddhist spirituality as a monk living in a forest in Burma. It's internal. I really have not been like socially oriented. I don't really try to reinforce my Buddhism through like Dhamma groups, that kind of thing. I mean, there are certain advantages. Like if you go to a Dhamma hall to meditate, there's like a 1 hour meditation, then you're much more likely to sit for the full hour without getting distracted and getting up and, going off and doing something else, just because, you've got sort of this group kind of reinforcing your behavior. But my connection with Buddhist spirituality, I mean, doing these Q&A videos is like a major one, and just having the sort of a more or less Dhamma oriented Discord server. I mean, that's kind of another connection with like a Western Buddhists, or just, I mean, not all of them are Western even. And just, I mean, it's just been internalized. I was a monk for 30 years, so I'm still carrying around a lot of dharmic ideas and attitudes and so forth, regardless of my external environment. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from SG. And SG, let's see, this is a question, I'm pretty sure. I think there's a question mark in here. Let's see. This is kind of weird. I don't remember this. The theists have ultimate reality as being a person, while Buddhists say it is not. Is it then correct to, okay, so there's a question here. Is it then correct to say that Nibbana is dead or passive like a rock? Or can we say it is consciousness or mind that is undifferentiated and beyond categorization, in which case we could say it has its own kind of singular life? This would be quite Platonic and seems to allow for the idea that it can act as a vertical cause and influence on everything without changing or involving itself, like rays of the sun don't diminish it. So the actual question here, is it correct to say that Nibbana is dead or passive like a rock, or can we say it is consciousness or mind that is undifferentiated beyond categorization? So yeah, it is kind of interesting how he starts this question. The theists have ultimate reality as being a person, which is kind of strange if you think about it. The highest truth is some sort of superhuman being, which is kind of a peculiar idea, and it's sort of like an anthropological phenomenon, I think, where we humans try to imagine the highest truth as just like sort of like a human, except be better than mere human, sort of a god. But no, it's not correct to say that Nibbana is dead or passive like a rock. You can say, I mean, you'd come closer to the truth, I suppose. It'd be less of an egregious heresy to say that Nibbana is consciousness or mind that is undifferentiated and beyond categories. And apparently there were a few attempts early on to define Nibbana this way, and Brahman in the Upanishads is defined this way as just infinite formless consciousness. But once you reify it, you kind of dragged it into samsara and it's not really nirvana or nibbana anymore. So the Buddhists, very wisely, in my opinion, have had a policy of reifying nibbana or nirvana as little as possible, reifying the capital A absolute as little as possible, because reifying it just like perverts it. You know, it just contaminates and kind of ruins it. It turns it into something that isn't nirvana. I mean, the word nirvana is not the same as actual nirvana. Just like the word God isn't the same as actual God. Capital G God. I mean, just both of them representing the absolute. The absolute really cannot be put into words. Words do not stick to it. So it would be a little more correct to say that it's consciousness or mind that is undifferentiated. Like I've continually brought up the fact that at least in two places in the suttas, once in the Digha Nikaya, once in the Majjhima Nikaya, there's an old fragment of a verse saying, essentially implying that nirvana or enlightenment is infinite consciousness, you know, it's unmanifest, luminous all around. So, I mean, they have gone there. Early Buddhist philosophers have gone there, and I think the Mahayana Buddhists have gone there way more than the Theravada Buddhists did, or the proto-Theravada Buddhists, before that whole idea just got dismissed, got rejected. So, yeah, I mean, you can say that, I mean, anything you say about it's going to be invalid. But, I mean, you could plausibly kind of say that nirvana is infinite formless consciousness, luminous all around. So then SG lower down here says this would be quite Platonic and seems to allow for the idea that it can act as a vertical cause and influence on everything. Well, it's not really a cause. I mean, it's no more of a cause than saying that ceramic is the cause of this cup or this mug, if you will. It's like the essence or substance. If you reify it, you know, if you start calling it an it, you know, it's the formless, it's the uncarved block of marble that contains within it all possible statues. So that marble, it doesn't really cause the statues, but it is like the essence or substance of these virtual, potential, conditional statues. Yeah, so it's not really a cause, but it is like the essence in a way, in like a metaphysical sense that really is heresy from the point of view of Theravada Buddhism. But later Mahayana schools embrace the idea, understandably so. So let's see, did I adequately answer this question? I think I did. Okay, I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Ismet. And Ismet asks kind of a long question here. Okay. He says, being too curious and encouraged by people online, I decided to experiment with psychedelic mushrooms. For a while, it was okay. Nothing crazy happened other than colorful visuals and mild improvement to my mood. The last time was different. I was halfway through consuming the juice, and it was evidently not the same as my previous experiments. My mind was instantly filled with this cosmic and chaotic energy. I used to be skeptical about these kind of anecdotes. I guess he means anecdotes, and thought they were probably blowing it out of proportion until what I could describe as my encounter with an interdimensional demon. First, my memory was gone, then time and space. I was dead, just nothingness. Then I was resurrected, and at that point, I believed everything I'd been skeptical of previously. That was followed by many hours of delirium. I was pretty sure I'd lost my mind, and there's no coming back. I was coming in and out of this dimension. Time and space were not consistent and only partly manifest. That broke my trust in this reality pretty much. I realized I trust it this much because it's been consistent for so long, but it didn't have to be. It could disappear in an instant. I could not really trust anything, and I was full of paranoia and fear. My hypothesis then was I strayed away from God, and he punished me in this way. I prayed to God to save me from this demon, and I'd do anything. I was desperate. I only realized the value of my sanity after I put it at risk. 3 days later, I'm still trying to adapt back to this reality, and fear for my sanity as if I could lose it at any moment. Any suggestions? Well, I think what kind of elicited this long question or request from Ismet is my answer to the first question in the previous Q&A, talking about The Trickster and the Paranormal by George P. Hansen. And, he talks about how, like, in order for anything to exist, there has to be stability. And so this version of samsara has built-in stability just by default, laws of nature and so forth. Plus, humans have to create more of this order and stability because our minds are a little too chaotic, I suppose. We're not like an animal that just follows these instincts and reflexes, more than religiously. That we've been liberated a little bit by being able to think outside the box to some degree. And so we need greater order to keep things in line, because the laws of physics, the laws of nature and all this are, you can break the law. They're there to keep things orderly so that this version of reality can persist for more than a trillionth of a second. And then there's infinite number of other possible realities contained in that uncarved block of stone, that infinite formless consciousness. So, let's see here. There's one part here that I would kind of mention something. Let's see. First, my memory was gone. Then time and space, I was dead. Just nothingness. Well, this is just kind of like a niggle, just sort of a trivial thing, I suppose. But if there was just nothingness, you wouldn't experience it. It's like if you were dead with just nothingness, you would not be aware of that at all, because there would be no awareness. If there's just nothingness, there's no awareness of the nothingness. That at the very least, there was a kind of concept of nothingness. Like when you get into like the formless realms, the arupa jhanas in Theravada Buddhism, there's the realm of infinite nothingness or just nothingness. And the reason that you can be aware of that is because it is an idea of nothingness, that your whole universe has just shrunk down to this idea of nothingness. But if it really was pure nothingness, that would be it. There'd be nothing there. You wouldn't be experiencing anything. So, I suppose I could mention that the last time I took LSD before I became a monk, I took it under the wrong circumstances. I took it in like this grungy trailer park with this person that I had known since I was a teenager. But he was kind of, not really a wholesome person. And then there was like this other stranger that came over when I was there. And eventually I just kind of broke down into a kind of psychotic episode. The only thing that really saved me was the awareness. Okay, I'm on LSD right now. I'm not going to make any like final decisions until tomorrow after I've come down. But I was fairly persuaded that it was like Armageddon was unleashed upon the earth, and it was the final battle between good and evil, and that these two people, my old friend and this stranger, were trying to drug me so that they could sacrifice me to Satan because they were on the other side. And I was determined that I'm on the side of good, And it was sort of like the standard paranoid psychotic sort of like narrative that was going on in my mind. And like I say, the thing that really protected me was the awareness, okay, I'm on drugs. I'm just going to wait till tomorrow. So, essentially what happened was that, going with the thesis of George P. Hansen, the trickster and the paranormal, that you broke down the order and all this chaotic juju was coming in, and it just kind of like disrupted the usual patterns that maintain the stability of this version of samsara for ismet. And so, yeah, if you have like a bad acid trip, or in this case, a bad mushroom trip, we can call it bad, even though, I mean, it has its good points. It kind of can strengthen you, give you insights. Apparently it gave ismet insights into the way samsara works, that kind of thing. But I mean, I was like emotionally bruised for like 6 months afterwards. It was like, it took a while to fully recover from this. Just in my case, it was just like a paranoid psychotic episode that was drug induced. And even though it was drug induced, I mean, still it has like this harrowing effect on you. It's like you escape from a concentration camp or a torture chamber or something. Then even though you're out, I mean, still it's going to take a while. I mean, some people, they can be processing that stuff for the rest of their life, especially if they're female. Females it's like they specialize in just processing traumas that they had decades previously. So let's see here. Yeah, I mean, one thing you got to bear in mind is that it's mind-made. Of course, the world we're living in is mind-made also. So let's see here. It's kind of a long question, so I'm just kind of like skimming through it, seeing if there's anything I should particularly mention. Followed by many hours of delirium. Yeah, that's drug-induced still. So there's that. And then once the, like most people and pretty much all non-human animals that have a mind just assume that this is reality. It's common sense realism or naive realism. You just take everything at face value, that bookcase back there really is a bookcase back there with books that have pages with like print on them, even if nobody's opening the book and looking. It's still in there. And people just assume that that's reality. Scientific realism is largely based on this kind of thinking. And when you all of a sudden, that idea sort of gets kicked in the head, it can just cause a great deal of instability and this chaotic energy and so forth. I think all in all, this experience that Ismet had is probably more positive than negative. I mean, it was harrowing at the time because his ideas of what is real were, I mean, they were like profoundly shaken and weakened. But I mean, it's like old habits, all of your past karma, or most of it, is reinforcing our existence in a stable pattern sort of samsara that is somewhat predictable and consistent. I mean, you got to have like a minimum amount of stability and consistency and predictability. Otherwise, it's just so chaotic that, I mean, you stop being you, kind of. It's like in a dream state where your dreams, it can just shift from one thing to another. Nothing necessarily stays the same. So that kind of existence is way less stable. It's not as sustainable as living in the kind of empirical sort of objective universe that we're living in now, which still is mind-made. Let's see. It could disappear. My hypothesis then was I strayed away from God. Well, I mean, you didn't really stray away from God. You just kind of got behind the curtain and were exposed to more of God, just in the fact that just infinite potential, infinite possibilities. It's like this stable little cross section of God that we're used to. I mean, you strayed beyond that into like the scariness of just you didn't get into the totality of God, but still you got into some of the alternative realities that are all equally contained in God, so to speak. And yeah, I mean, that can be really scary, especially the first time you experience something like that. So let's see. I only realized the value of my sanity after I put it at risk. 3 days later, still trying to. Well, I hope it doesn't take 6 months for you to fully recover, like it did in my case. But yeah, I mean, it's the uncarved block of marble. I mean, that would be God, capital G God, and just put air quotes on there, just because, I mean, words really can't do it justice. I mean, it's just infinite possibilities, including all sorts of weird, chaotic, scary stuff. And so human beings who have gotten a mind big enough and flexible enough that just the laws of physics aren't quite enough. We have to have taboos and like social norms and all this kind of stuff to further stabilize things, to keep us locked in to this samsara that is more or less stable and predictable. Because you get too wild, you get too liminal, and I mean, you can just like go off the track away from this kind of samsara into something that maybe you can't come back from. So, I mean, there is that. And like I've said, like it mentions in the book, The Trickster and the Paranormal, that a lot of like witches, for example, or psychics, in order to break the laws of physics by doing their magic or whatever it is, they will deliberately like flout or violate like taboos, social norms, and that kind of thing, just as a way of increasing the liminal juju that's getting into this system. And taking strong psychedelics can do the same kind of thing. So I do hope that Ismet is doing better now, and just realize, I mean, it's just beyond this version of reality is an infinite number of other versions of reality, and some of them are just completely chaotic. Most of them are. Most of them, I mean, when you've got infinite possibilities, most of the possibilities aren't going to be like safe, stable systems. They're just going to be all over the place, just wild with just no rules. So, I mean, you have to prepare yourself for that. Like meditation masters, you can kind of get into, or sort of just take a safer route, a less risky kind of route in like cultivating this infinite formless consciousness, or at least some human approximation of that. So I guess I pretty much answered that. And again, I do have to be done within a certain time limit. I think we got plenty of time though, but still we got to go and get an antique piece of furniture from somebody at 3:30 in the afternoon today. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Stellar Supreme, etc., because he has more than one name. He says, in the Sigala Sutta, the Sigala Sutta states 2 of the marital responsibilities of a husband to his wife are: 1, hand over household authority and give her control over managing the home affairs, and 2, provide adornments, supply her with clothes, jewelry, and items to maintain her beauty. And then Stellar Supreme, etc. Stellar Supreme et al. Says, do you adhere to these with Arain? And Arain is the name that my woman takes on the Discord server. So with regard to handing over household authority and giving her control over managing the home affairs, she has more interest in that than me anyway. She's very aesthetically oriented, so she's the one that is like making most of the decisions with regard to like furniture and curtains, that kind of thing. I've really never had much interest in that sort of thing. I'm a minimalist. If I were here by myself, there'd be the fish tank and a bookcase, and that'd probably be it. You know, a desk and a chair in this room. And so, I mean, she does just sort of, I mean, she has just taken that responsibility with my blessings, but I do have the power of veto. For example, one time she bought this reproduction of a painting and put it on the wall in our bedroom, and I just thought it was an ugly painting. I mean, she will talk about how, oh, that painting is too muddy. This painting looked like it was painted with mud. I mean, it was just, you could hardly even tell what it was supposed to be. You know, it was supposed to be like some oceanscape with waves or something, but it was so like, what's the word? Like, it was like a big painting movement, like in the late 1800s. Expression, gosh. It's weird that I have these mental blocks sometimes. Impressionistic. But I mean, it just wasn't realistic, and it just looked like it was painted with mud, and you could hardly even tell what it was supposed to be. I just did not like that. So finally, I just put my foot down and insisted that the painting come off the wall. So I do have a certain power of veto. I still have some authority. I haven't just completely surrendered all authority with regard to the running this house, managing its affairs, and so forth. But she mostly takes care of that stuff. So that's fine. And then providing adornments, supplying her with clothes, jewelry, and items to maintain her beauty. Well, again, she pretty much takes care of most of that herself. She has access to the bank account. So, yeah, I'm doing that largely passively. I mean, like buying her gifts, you know, like Christmas is coming, you know, Valentine's Day, her birthday, our anniversary. That's when I'll give her stuff like that, other than just flowers. You know, I'll come home and give her flowers sometimes. But with regard to clothes and jewelry and stuff, it's hit or miss. I've got like maybe a 50-50 record in getting something that she really likes. You know, other times, you know, she'll thank me for it sweetly and all, and then it goes on the shelf and she never wears it or whatever. But yeah, I adhere to these pretty much. And it just kind of happens spontaneously, organically anyway. So, yeah, I do follow the Theravada Sutta with regard to those two marital responsibilities of a husband to his wife. How well she follows her responsibilities, as stated in the Theravada Sutta, is another question. So, I'm just going to move on to Stellar Supreme et al.'s next question here. How necessary do you consider it to extend metta to all beings when sending it to particular beings who need it if you don't have negative intentions towards beings more broadly? I understand this is the hardest part for some people, but what about when it isn't? 2 question marks, but the same question. And this is kind of a strange question here that I don't fully comprehend. For whatever reason, my mind is not wrapping around it very well. How necessary do you consider it to extend metta to all beings? Well, if you just stop there, it wouldn't be necessary at all. I mean, you don't have to send metta to all beings. So he says, let's see, how necessary do you consider it to extend metta to all beings when sending it to particular beings who need it? Well, still, I mean, if there's one being who needs metta, you can send metta to that one person. It's not necessary to send it to all beings in the universe. And there's an infinite number of them, and they're not ultimately real anyway. See, if you don't have negative intentions towards beings more broadly, then that part is the part that confuses me. If you don't have negative intentions towards beings more broadly, that part is the part that confuses me somewhat. So let's just ignore that part. So how necessary do I consider it to extend metta to all beings when sending it to particular beings who need it? I mean, there's no necessity at all. It's not like a commandment in Buddhism. Thou shalt send metta to all beings. No, it's optional, and it may be beneficial. I mean, it's clearly beneficial. It's good karma to send metta to one being or two beings or 10 beings or 10 zillion beings or all beings, that is wholesome behavior if you're doing it like sincerely, not just, it's time to do metta meditation, so just follow the cookbook and the cookbook instructions on doing metta meditation and just kind of pretending that you're sending metta to all beings. I mean, even that probably has some good karma mixed in with it, even though a lot of people who do metta meditation really are just kind of fooling themselves. They just get kind of like this warm, glowy feeling in their chest and think that, that's just the result of them sending metta to all beings, when really they're generating the warm, glowy feeling in themselves while, kind of pretending to love the universe. So let's see here. I understand this is the hardest part for some people. What about when it isn't? Yeah, again, that one phrase or clause in there has confused me, so I do not fully follow the question. That Stellar Supreme, etc. He has like this abstract way of thinking sometimes that is hard to follow. So let's see. The hardest part for some people, sending metta to people that you don't like, sending metta to people that hate you and are causing problems for you, that is generally the hard part for most people that are sending metta. But it's still, if you can succeed at that, it really does work, and it can actually change the attitude, or at least help to inspire a change in the attitude in the other person who's causing problems for you. But nowhere in the suttas is it mandatory to send metta to anybody. To have, there is some sutta, it's kind of an anomalous sutta where the Buddha is saying it's better to swallow a red hot iron ball than for a monk to be accepting alms from the people without metta in his heart. That kind of thing. It's kind of an anomalous sutta, but still, as a general rule, it is not necessary to send metta, because like ethics in Buddhism are neutral. They're largely negative. It's don't do this, don't do that. The only positive virtue, or the main positive like ethical action is generosity in Buddhism. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around this though. How necessary do you consider it to extend metta to all beings when sending it to particular beings who need it, if you don't have negative intentions towards beings more broadly? It's not necessary at all. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is also from Stellar Supreme et al. He says, with regard to that acquaintance with the monk who feared he would be attacked by the government if he came back to the West, do you feel he had anything psychological compromising going on? And I think Stellar Supreme here misremembered that I have mentioned that there was a trumpet player, like a jazz musician in Bali that I knew, who was African American. He came from St. Louis, Missouri. And he was afraid to come back to America because he thought that he'd just be like beaten up by like airport security as soon as he comes back to America. Just like America is just like completely racist against black people, so that he was afraid to come back to America just because, just black people are just persecuted and practically enslaved again. That kind of thing. And I didn't see it at all. Obviously you see plenty of black people walking around airports and so forth that aren't being like beaten up by airport security. I've never seen a black person beaten up by airport security. I did see a black person in like the Tokyo or Narita, I guess, the Narita airport in Japan, where we went into like this holding room, and there's this black guy lying across some seats there who looked like he'd been there for a week. He just had a really disgusted look on his face. It looked like it had been there for days. But in America, yeah, this person, I mean, he was kind of eccentric. I mean, just kind of artists in general, eccentricity often goes well with being an artist. And he really did have sort of a conspiracy mindset where, you know, he was fairly obsessed with like the Rothschilds and so forth. So, yeah, I think that he was just kind of being eccentric in his fear of coming back to America. Maybe it was something else. You know, he was just sort of giving that reason when deeper down there were other reasons why he didn't want to come back to America. So, yeah, it wasn't a monk, though. I've never met a monk who was afraid to come back to America. In fact, Burmese monks are just like salivating over the idea of possibly coming to America. So, I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Xenothoid. And Xenothoid says, in right-wing circles, I'm starting to see the sentiment that the USA Constitution is too old and slow for the rapidly accelerating world, and that it may be time for a new one with more autocratic elements. Has the Constitution outlived its usefulness? I've heard that the Founding Fathers conceived the Constitution as a kind of non-human monarch, but like everything else, all monarchies are impermanent. So I guess the question here is, has the Constitution outlived its usefulness? And no, I don't think so at all. That really, like, for example, the Trump administration, the second Trump administration, people like on the left are calling him a dictator, an autocrat, and so forth, when really he's still well within the limits of the Constitution. It's just that what has happened is that the president has, like, forfeited most of his authority in the late, you know, the late American experiment, you know, the USA, that the Founding Fathers had the president really as the chief executive, who had a lot more authority than most presidents are willing to exercise, partly because just bureaucracies have formed that are kind of extra constitutional. You know, they're not against the Constitution, but they're not specifically mentioned in the Constitution, and that has pretty much just kind of taken over the government. You know, the so-called deep state in all this. Whereas, really, you can have a very authoritative, like Andrew Jackson kind of president, or Theodore Roosevelt, who really are a take charge kind of president. And of course, the leftists will all be yowling about how he's a dictator, but really he's still within the limits of the Constitution. Donald Trump, I mean, he's more constitutional than like his immediate predecessors, like Biden and Obama. They were continually trying to do stuff that was unconstitutional. Farm subsidies only for black farmers, that kind of thing. So, I mean, if you do it right, you know, a president like Trump, who is just sort of like maximizing his rights and authority within the limits of the Constitution, then you can really have a president who really does do a lot of stuff that most people think is unconstitutional or wrong or whatever, but it's still within the limits of the Constitution. So yeah, I think to redo the Constitution, not through amendments, you know, constitutionally, but just to abolish the U.S. Constitution and replace it with a new Constitution, I think that would just be just idiotic. That would be insanely idiotic, because most people nowadays just do not have the wisdom or the political acumen as the Founding Fathers. I mean, it really was. I mean, it seems to me that the American government was like an improvement on constitutional monarchy. You know, it was like an improvement on the English government. The English government, you've got Parliament, which is the House of Lords, and the House of Commons, which have been replaced in America by the Senate and the House of Representatives. And then you had the king, who was replaced by the president. So we've got like a king, a constitutional monarch, but you know, he gets, you know, like there's an election every 4 years. So he's not just king for life, and it's not just his son who becomes the next one, although that has happened a couple times. Well, I guess not the next one, but at least, like George W. Bush, he was the son of a president. I guess John Quincy Adams was the son of John Adams, if I'm not mistaken. But they didn't just come right after their father. So, yeah, I really don't see a problem with the U.S. Constitution. I just see a problem with just sort of like the degeneracy of American politics in general, especially on the left. But I mean, it's on both sides. The neocons, for example. I mean, I didn't really start voting Republican until Trump came along, because I mean, when I was younger, it's just, I mean, things are different now, but when I was younger, it was like conservative Republicans. I mean, they were just kind of, greedy people who wanted money, and including the Christians, which is ironic. Conservative Christians are just out for money, like Dr. Turley on YouTube. I mean, he's like a prime example of why I really didn't have much use for conservatism or Christianity, because, it's just like, make money, make money, make money. But I'm kind of just rambling at this point. So I don't think the Constitution has outlived its usefulness. I think just the populace has become too degenerate and in certain ways immature to live up to the ideals of the Constitution. And so changing the Constitution, like corrupting it, coming up with something, you're likely to come up with something worse. That really you can be an authoritative kind of a president within the scope of the Constitution. And I'm just going to move on to Xenothoid's next question. And I forgot to really think about an answer to this, so I'm going to have to do it off the cuff here. Is there any issue you think both sides of the political aisle are not paying enough attention to, as in something that doesn't get brought up enough? Well, gosh, I'm going to have to think about this. Is there any issue you think both sides of the political aisle are not paying enough attention to? Well, some of the taboo stuff, like human biodiversity. At least the right is thinking about it more now. But I mean, like back when the neocons were in power, I mean, it was just taboo, human biodiversity. It was just outside the Overton window. But I mean, that is something to consider. Just sort of like, in certain ways, this Western civilization is better for Western people than like multiculturalism, that kind of thing. Let's see. Gosh, I mean, really, they're not paying enough attention to. I mean, there are certain things like population collapse in developed countries, that kind of thing. That, I mean, just to have the human population decrease, just that in itself would probably be a good thing. You get down to a manageable 1 or 2 billion people, that would be fine. But when you've got a welfare state where the older people are being supported in their pensions and social security and so forth by a decreasing number of young people, that's just not sustainable. But I do think the right does pay some attention to that kind of thing. And the left, of course, is just, well, we just solved the problem by importing tens of millions of brown-skinned foreigners. So, yeah, I really can't think of anything that really stands out other than maybe human biodiversity, which is still largely a taboo subject. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from PSA. PSA says, what are your thoughts on the announcement of the British government to implement a digital ID system across the UK, which will be mandatory for anyone wishing to work there? Do you think it will lead to a digital currency, and then it will slowly spread to other castrated countries such as the US and Canada? Well, first of all, I do not think the US is fully castrated. I mean, it may have lost one ball, but it still has the other ball, so to speak. So, but I mean, if like the globalist hysterical left does succeed in getting back into power, then there's a good chance that America will finally, once and for all, be fully castrated. But let's getting back to what are my thoughts on the British government implementing a digital ID system across the UK. I mean, that's going to be it's another step towards like what the communist Chinese have, or the fascist Chinese, because they're not really communists anymore. And it's like, what is it where you post something on X or Facebook that goes against the government, that gets put on your record, and then suddenly you can't buy airplane tickets anymore, that kind of thing. Then yeah, I mean, that's another step towards totalitarianism. So I do think that the digital ID system across the UK, which is mandatory, yeah, that's a step towards the brave new world, really. Do I think it'll lead to a digital currency? A good chance of it. And then it will slowly spread to other castrated countries. Yeah, like Canada, Europe, that kind of thing. US is more of a holdout than other countries. Like USA, we still got guns. There's as many guns as people in the USA. And for some reason, America is resisting castration much more than Europe and Canada and Australia and New Zealand, for that matter. But yeah, it does seem to be there's like this gradual move towards like digital currency where there's no real money anymore. You just have like your ID card. You know, it's like you've got an ID card that serves as, you know, maybe your driver's license too, your maybe not voter registration, because they don't want that. At least the left doesn't. And then, I mean, you just pay for anything. You just use the card like a credit card, and it just automatically takes money out of your account, which is just virtual. You know, it's just like blips in a computer. That's possible. I mean, that does seem to be the direction we are heading. But I'm not a prophet, really, so I'm not going to be prophesying here about what the future is going to be like. So I'm just going to move on to PSA's next question. What do you think of Nick Fuentes' recent meteoric ascendancy to popularity? And I really have never watched a Nick Fuentes video. I mean, I've heard maybe like a sentence or two coming out of his mouth, just like in little short clips. My understanding is Nick Fuentes is, let's see, he's anti-Israel. You know, he does not support, I mean, he's not like completely anti-Israel, but I do think that he doesn't like American support of Israel at the level it's at. And he's, I don't know, kind of like alt-right that has gone as close to mainstream as any alt-righter has gone. I mean, it used to be called the alt-right like 10 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that. Yeah, he's just kind of like an edgy shitlord. I mean, like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson are kind of, you know, they're saying stuff that right-wingers, at least mainstream right-wingers, aren't supposed to say. And really, I think part of his meteoric ascendancy was sort of like the vacuum caused after Charlie Kirk gets assassinated. You know, it's like, who's going to be the next Charlie Kirk? You know, they're kind of looking around, and a lot of people are latching on to Nick Fuentes as sort of a spokesman for conservative youth, that kind of thing. But really, as I said at the beginning, I really am not familiar with Nick Fuentes. I'm not particularly interested in Nick Fuentes. And so I really can't really say much about Nick Fuentes. I might agree with a lot of what he says. I don't know. So I'm just moving on to the next question. This is from Chirzaskaziz. And Chirzaskaziz says, how often did you practice death meditation as Buddha often recommended? I've never turned death meditation into something where you just sit there cross-legged with your eyes closed for an hour thinking about death or the inevitability of death. The closest I came with regard to that is like I had a skeleton somebody donated to me. They bought it from like the Mandalay Medical College or something. I had it sitting in like the lotus posture outside my cave Part of the reason for that was just to discourage visitors, but a lot of visitors would come just to look at it. And, I went to see autopsies a few times when I was living near Mandalay. Go to the Mandalay City morgue and watch autopsies. When I went to India, I made a special point of going to the burning ghats in Varanasi. But I didn't really do this formal sitting practice of contemplating the inevitability of death. It's just sometimes you look at the skeleton or the skull and just think, as that is, so will I be. As I am, so is that. That kind of thing. So it's just like an occasional reminder more than any kind of formal sitting practice. And I'm just going to move on to Jerzaska's next question, which is, I've never heard of karma expiration. How does it work according to Theravada? Yeah, this is a subject that came up on the Discord server about how some karma expires. Let's say you do something that has a certain karmic consequence, of something that is likely to happen back to you, but you just, for whatever reason, just kind of avoid the circumstances in which it would be able to come back to you. And so, it's like, let's just say you abuse a horse. You're like 100 years ago in a previous life, you whipped a horse to death or something. And so you have this karma with regard to a horse maybe like kicking you and messing you up, like you messed up that horse in a previous life. But then for whatever reasons, in several lives, you just don't go around horses. It's like there are not as many horses nowadays. And so that karma, and some karma, according to Theravada Buddhist philosophy, if you go a sufficient period of time without the opportunity, without putting yourself in a position where the karma can happen, the fruition of that karma can arise just due to, just lack of opportunity, that some kinds of karma can just like expire, they just kind of fade out. Not all karma. And I don't know if Abhidhamma even attempts to explain which kinds of karma can expire and which kinds don't. I really don't remember seeing that at all. But according to Theravada Buddhism, some karma, if you go a long enough period of time without there being an opportunity for that karma to reach fruition, then it can just fade out due to impermanence. So, yeah, you might want to look that up on the internet or something. AI is getting to the point where you can just ask a question of like Grok on X, and you get fairly good answers sometimes. So let's see here. I guess I answered that question. I'm moving on to the next one. This is from Newman. And Newman says, what were the politics of other Western monks you knew? And I really didn't know a whole lot of other Western monks because I was mostly living in a Burmese environment. So occasionally I'd meet Western monks. And for the most part, we just did not discuss politics. I wasn't really interested in politics for most of the time that I was a monk. When I was living in Burma, I was only around 2015, 2016, when I started realizing that the left has just gone completely insane and started taking an interest in politics. That's like when Donald Trump became president. And so I was a Trump supporter then. I still am. Partly because, he was like the voice of common sense, this standing up to this just mass hysteria that was taking over the West. But the only Western monk that I can even recall discussing politics with me, like back in the day when I was living in Burma, was a certain Australian monk who was a socialist. This monk, he eventually dropped out and became one of my supporters. He was still living in Burma because he married a Burmese woman. And he was like complete lefty. And we discussed it a few times. Like he said, when he was still a monk, it's like, I'm a socialist by nature, but I realized that socialism generally doesn't work the way it's supposed to in theory, something like that. But I mean, definitely he endorsed a kind of communistic sort of lifestyle. And then after he dropped out of the monkhood and still living in Burma, and one of my supporters in Burma, I mean, he was just completely anti-Trump. You know, he'd be sending me these kind of childish texts or emails. You know, the walls are closing in for Trump now. Trump's going to prison. Ha 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 ha. This kind of stuff. And he might still be doing that for all I know. You know, it's like the walls are perpetually closing in on Donald Trump. But with regard to that, aside from that kind of real, like, extreme leftist Australian monk who dropped out of the monkhood, I think there are quite a few other Western monks that I knew that were kind of along my lines. But for the most part, when Western monks in Asia, at least when I was a monk, most of the time that I was a monk, they just really were not interested in politics. You know, there's like, I wasn't even interested in Burmese politics all that much. I was living in Burma. A lot of the time, I wouldn't even know what the name of the president or the dictator was. You know, I really didn't know all that much about it. I was just out in the forest. You know, you're not like hooked up to the internet, or at least not until like the last few years. But most of the time I was in Burma, it's like you're not even hearing the news. You don't even know what the political situation is really. I mean, you hear through, you know, just through osmosis. You just pick up somewhere or other that Obama is the president now, and like Tony Blair is the prime minister of the UK and so forth. But and that was about as far as it went. I really was not much interested in politics as a general rule up until around 2015, when I finally realized that the left is just going just stark raving mad. And they still are. And enough people actually are like conformist enough that they're just conformed to it. So, yeah, the only Western monk that I really knew for sure what his politics were was this, like a complete socialist type who was fortunately Australian rather than American. So I'm just moving on to Newman's next question. Were political views seen as a samsaric distraction and anything but the practice itself? I guess I've already kind of answered this. Political views. I mean, there were Burmese monks that I would hear their political views because, I mean, lots and lots of Burmese monks will confide to somebody like me that, you know, they disapprove of the Burmese government. The Burmese military dictatorship is not a good government. You know, you hear that kind of stuff from Burmese lay people and Burmese monks. It's sort of a universal phenomenon in Burma that most people just don't like the government there, more so than in America. They think America's great. That's one reason why so many Burmese monks want to go to America. Because you don't have the government just snatching citizens off the street and sending them to torture chambers, that kind of thing, or just shooting them. So, I haven't answered the question though. Were political views seen as a samsaric distraction and anything but the practice? Well, it is considered to be animal talk. You know, like again and again in the suttas, you know, there's this list of animal talk where, talking about kings and prime ministers or kings and ministers of state and wars and that kind of thing. It's all animal talk. It's all inappropriate for a monk. Monks aren't supposed to be talking about politics much anyway. So, yeah, I mean, it was sort of like monks talking about girls, you know, it happens sometimes for various reasons, but still, I mean, as a monk in Burma, I just did not talk about politics much. Towards the end, then I'd be like writing about politics more than talking about it because, I mean, I'm just mainly dealing with Burmese people that when I was living in the monastery in California, shortly before I stopped being a monk, that, you do hear a little bit of politics, but I mean, most people just don't talk about politics much at monasteries. But you'd hear like people, that they vote Democrat because they want it easier for their relatives to come to America. I mean, that's one of the main reasons why foreign immigrants are Democrats, even if they work for a living. If they don't work for a living, then of course they're getting handouts. But even if they do work for a living, like they're doctors or something, still they want it to be as easy as possible for their relatives to come over and move to America. And so they'll vote Democrat for that reason. But then even some of the Burmese lay supporters like Trump, they were Trump supporters just because of, sort of like seeing the bigger picture. So, yeah, political views are seen as a samsaric distraction. Yeah, definitely. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Practice Metta. Practice Metta says, in the Brahmajala Sutta, does the Buddha explicitly reject the view that a singular infinite consciousness is the ultimate nature of reality? The Brahmajala Sutta, it seems the purpose of the Brahmajala Sutta is to shoot down all possibilities. So, eternalism view and like annihilationist view and all that, it's all shot down. And so in the Brahmajala Sutta, it doesn't, I don't recall a specific mention of like the Upanishadic understanding of Brahman, infinite formless consciousness. And as I've said before, even in this video, there are at least 2 suttas in the suttas that do imply that Nibbana itself or Nirvana is infinite formless consciousness. But I have seen one explicit like rejection of that idea in the text. I don't think it was the Brahmajala Sutta. The Brahmajala Sutta, like I said, it tries to shoot down all views, and it may be that this Upanishadic view wasn't popular enough even to, it kind of was under the radar at the time of the composition of the Brahmajala Sutta. But the Brahmajala Sutta, it practically starts, like some of the first wrong views that it shoots down are the eternalist view, where it's like, reality or like the highest truth is just like infinite and eternal and unchanging, which, you could say that this singular infinite consciousness could fit under that. To say that, the absolute is infinite, eternal, unchanging, that would be good enough, I suppose. I think that the Upanishadic view would fit under that. But there is one sutta, at least one sutta I have seen. I don't think it was the Brahmajala Sutta, though, that specifically shoots down the Upanishadic view of infinite formless consciousness. And, it's kind of an anomaly in that sutta. Even with regard to the context of the sutta, it seems like it was just kind of inserted there as a kind of afterthought after the Upanishadic view of reality became more well known, that, some early Buddhist philosopher or philosophers felt that should be addressed. And so this denunciation of it just gets inserted into a sutta. But I think at the time of the Brahmajala Sutta, that just to shoot down an eternal, like infinite, or anything eternal, anything unchanging that is like a highest truth, that, that's already taken care of. That's almost immediately it's like one of the first wrong views in the Brahmajala Sutta. Like eternalist view comes before annihilationist view. So definitely the singular infinite consciousness would be a kind of eternalist view, I suppose it would seem like. So I'm just going to move on to Practice Metta's next question. And I'm being a little more terse in this, in that kind of starting late and everything on a Sunday, and I got to go somewhere. So anyways, Practice Metta says, when some claim that in deep psychedelic states, duality, such as subject, object, life, death, collapses into a non-dual, self-aware, eternal unity, is this the same as the eternalist view, Sasatawada, that the Buddha critiqued? Well, anything eternal is going to fit into the eternalist view. Let's see, what is it? Duality collapses into a non-dual, self-aware, eternal unity. Yeah, is this the same as the eternalist view? Well, it's one kind of eternalist view. There's a number of different kinds of eternalist views. Like even Christianity has an eternalist view in that you have an immortal soul. The soul can change, but still it's that soul itself is eternal. So that's a kind of eternalist view. If something doesn't change, then that's a different kind of eternalist view. You know, it's the same thing changes, which is already kind of paradoxical, is one eternalist view. The same thing just doesn't change at all forever and ever. That's a different kind of eternalist view. And so, yeah, it's a kind of eternalist view. It's not the only eternalist view, but it is one kind of eternalist view. Deep psychedelic states, duality, subject, object, life, death, collapses into a non-dual, self-aware, eternal unity. Yeah, that would be a kind of eternalist view if you're saying that it's eternal, obviously. Anything that becomes eternal would fit under eternalist view. And again, in Buddhism, the Buddhists wisely avoided reifying the absolute. You just don't talk about it. Words just cannot do it justice. Words can't touch it. Anything you say about it is just perverting it. You know, you're just turning it into an idea in your head, which is not eternal. So you can have an idea of eternity in your head, but that idea is not going to be eternal, and it's just a kind of delusion. So, yeah, I think I answered that question. I'm going to move on to the next one. This is also from Practice Metta, one of the only people who ask questions on Rumble, incidentally. And he says, after a psychedelic session, many feel overwhelming love and ethical urgency. The suttas say morality, or sila, is the foundation. Can a drug-induced ethical resolve ever replace the gradual training and precepts, or is it like borrowed virtue? Well, I wouldn't say that it's either. I mean, a drug-induced ethical resolve, to some degree, it can replace a certain amount of gradual training and precepts. I mean, it can just jolt you into a kind of mental state that it might take years for a meditator to get into. That's one thing that, as a monk, that I always considered like LSD is, I mean, it can just like jolt you into a state pretty reliably that, I mean, meditation is much less reliable. I mean, just a second. Hey, you guys, quit it. The dogs are roughhousing. Like this dog, for example. Okay, you go back now. Ooh, here. And this one. These two just keep going at it. You guys, I just riled them up even more by picking them up and paying attention to them. Okay, let's get back to the question, though. Now, you guys, come on, stop it. Stop it. Stop it. They're all riled up. Even more so now after I told them to stop being riled up. Just a second. Come on, you guys. Quit it. No. Okay. Okay. So, I mean, the main question is, can any insights that are spontaneously arisen through psychedelic drugs, for example, can they be sort of on a par with gradual insights that arise through meditation and so forth? And I used to like semi-lament as a monk that meditation is so much less reliable than just taking a tab of acid. Because you take the tab of acid, you know there's going to be some fairly radical results. Whereas in meditation, I mean, you can be struggling and floundering for literally like 2 or 3 years before you get into anything remotely resembling the kind of like profundity of what you can experience with an acid trip. So I think one Buddhist explanation of this is that if you're having these insights through psychedelics, which can be legitimate insights that might take years just through sitting cross-legged and striving away the old-fashioned way, then what probably happened is you did some striving in previous lives and so forth, and this is the fruition of that. So it's really not cheating, so long as it's really like a genuine, profound insight. And I used to have almost every time I would take LSD when I was a young man, starting as a teenager, it would almost always be religious experience, like mystical experiences. So let's see here. Can a drug-induced ethical resolve ever replace the gradual training and precepts? Well, I mean, in a way, it's the fruition of previous gradual training and precepts from previous lives. I mean, that would be one Buddhist explanation of it. So it's not really borrowed virtue. Anything that you experience, I mean, it's you earned it in a way. Anything that you experience is the fruition of karma. If not in this life, then in a previous life. And so, I mean, there's no cheating in that regard. There are some people who think that they're becoming enlightened or something from taking psychedelic drugs that really aren't. So you have to be careful about just being deceived, especially by yourself. But, I mean, insights that can arise through psychedelics are just like insights that can arise through just about anything else. And so in many cases, they are legit. I don't think it should completely replace the gradual training and precepts, but still it definitely augments it. It can anyway for some people. Other people, they might be like Ismet. They take psychedelics once and it just kind of blows their mind and kind of shatters their psyche for a while. And, you know, it may cause more harm than good. Some people, you know, they have like latent like susceptibilities to mental illness or some such, but they're holding it together fairly well. And then they drop some powerful drug, which then just sends them over the edge. That can happen too. But yeah, and the main point that I'm trying to make though is that anything that you experience is the fruition of your karma. So apparently you did some practice in a previous life, or you have some kind of latent subconscious striving going on that doesn't really reach ego consciousness that finally is coming to the surface. So it's not cheating really, unless it's just like illegitimate experience. You just think it's profound when it really isn't. That can happen too. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Indiana Dhamma. And Indiana Dhamma says, in some Catholic monasteries, non-monks can become lay affiliates who make certain vows or promises and have an official connection to a local monastery. For example, Benedictine monasteries often have oblates. It allows the laity a limited participation in the life of the monastery and to observe some monastic practices under the guidance of the monks. These lay oblates otherwise remain householders. Is there a Theravadan equivalent? Well, there's not an exact equivalent to this. There's first you've got the fully ordained bhikkhu, who's fully ordained. Below that, you've got the samanera, or the novice, who technically is not fully ordained, but I mean, he's still not a lay person. Below that, you've got in Asian cultures, in Thailand, it's a pakao. In Burma, it's a pothido. I think, I think they're called anagarikas, who they might wear white robes. They still shave their head. So, I mean, they're really not a layman either as a general. Well, I mean, they're a layman, but they're not really living the household life. Below that, you've got like a monastery attendant or a kapia karaka. They're a lay person. They wear lay clothes usually, but still they're not living the householder life because they're a monastery attendant, at least the ones that are living at the monastery. But for example, when I lived at Wonbo Wildlife Refuge Monastery in northwestern Burma, there was, I think he was the nephew of the old monk who lived down by the river, he lived in the village. I'm pretty sure he was married, probably had kids, but every day he'd just come to the monastery and, he'd be pulling weeds, doing stuff that monks aren't supposed to do, and just, he'd sweep up leaves that fell from the trees or rake them up or whatever, and, make sure the monks were doing okay, and he'd go back home again. So there's that kind of a thing. Also, you can be an upasaka, or a female would be an upasika, who might take 8 precepts and, they sort of formally dedicate themselves to Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha in a way that the average layperson doesn't. They might take like 9 precepts, that kind of thing. A lot of women in Burma, they wear yogi yarn, it's called, which is like meditator colors, which is for a woman is brown. They have their hair pulled back, they have their hair up, and they wear like brown clothing with a brown sarong. And usually they have what is called a Tibet, which is just a kind of scarf thing, which is also brown over one shoulder. And they've dedicated their lives to Dhamma. They don't necessarily shave their head. So there's that kind of thing. And it's largely just like whatever the layperson, how far they want to go, they can go there. I mean, it's not like you're prevented by taboos or anything from being too Dhamma oriented as a layperson, that sort of thing. So it's not as standardized, I guess, as in Roman Catholicism, but there's like a whole spectrum of just worldly minded layperson and like fully renunciant monk and just all these different options in between. So I think I answered that question. I'm pretty sure. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Fake Tig. And wow, Fake Tig is our last questioner. So we're almost done already. That's all right. I can live with that. So Fake Tig says, my meditation has become quite good nowadays, and am very happy and am less depressed. And I was wondering what comes next. Where do I go from here? Just keep doing it? Well, I mean, I assume you have not like completely perfected your meditation. So you can just keep meditating. And yeah, I mean, it wouldn't hurt to just keep doing it. Where do you go from here? Yeah, until you're fully enlightened, I mean, you haven't really reached the end. So happy and less depressed, that's good. Wondering what comes next. Yeah, well, I mean, you don't often consciously choose what comes next. It just kind of happens. It may be that if you're getting in a stage in your meditation where you're not making progress anymore, then you might have to switch to a different kind of meditation. It's like St. John of the Cross in one or more of his books is talking about how to know when to switch over from meditation to contemplation. Like in Roman Catholicism, they have a similar kind of meditation regime, at least in the contemplative orders of Roman Catholicism, to Buddhism, where they have what is called meditation, which has an object. You're visualizing scenes from the life of Jesus, or you're doing like a mantra, dear God, please have mercy upon me, a sinner, or, Ave Maria, or the Pater Noster, that kind of thing. And then above that is contemplation, in which you are not thinking anything, or at least you're not supposed to be thinking anything. Sometimes a stray thought will arise, in which case, like in Buddhism, you just kind of note it and let it go. You dismiss it. So, I mean, if you get to a point in your meditation where you're just kind of stagnating or getting bored with it, getting restless, feeling like there should be something more, then you have to go to a more advanced meditation technique. But so long as you haven't perfected it yet and you're still making progress, I mean, you're still improving, there's no need to change anything. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if you stop making progress, then it's time to make some kind of a change, probably. Especially if you've stopped making progress for a considerable amount of time. So I'm just going to move on to Fake Tig's next question. What are your thoughts on Rumi, the Sufi Muslim who is very close to Buddhist ideas? Have you heard about him? Yeah, I've heard about him, and I've read some of Rumi's poetry, in translation, of course. But the thing is, there were a number of people like Rumi, these sort of eccentric poets in like northern India or that general area of the world. Like Kabir also is another one. And I really couldn't tell Kabir from Rumi. If I were to see one of their poems, I wouldn't know if it was Rumi or Kabir or somebody else, because there was more than two. So for me, it's just kind of a genre of like religious poetry coming from like medieval northwestern India or some such. I assume there were some South Indian ones, some that were, out of what is India, that were all composing similar sorts of like devotional, philosophical kind of poetry. So, yeah, I mean, it's fine. I mean, I've never really been really drawn to that sort of thing. I think I preferred Kabir to Rumi, if I remember correctly. But let's see, what are my thoughts on him? Yeah, interesting. I'm sure he really resonates with a lot of people, or just that sort of poetry resonates with a lot of people, which is fine. I mean, if it helps you to have a more dharmic mood and attitude and helps to uplift you, then that's fine with me. So I'm just going to move on to Fake Tig's third and last question, and the last question of this Q&A. By golly, have you had thoughts on how Hollywood wants the public to fall in love with women who are sure of themselves and know what they want and where they are going, while making the male characters more submissive and uncertain about almost everything? Nowadays, when I go for dates, I keep looking for women that are sure of themselves, but this is never the case, as women need men for certainty and reliability, cause women are unstable in some ways. Thoughts on this? Well, I think for the viewers, you should bear in mind that Fake Tig is Ethiopian. And so it may be that some of his experiences are kind of more what you would expect in Ethiopia than in Hollywood. But let's see. Have you had thoughts on how Hollywood wants the public to fall in love with women who are sure of themselves and know what they want, where they go? I'm not sure. Like Hollywood movies, it's been a thing since maybe the 1970s. I think maybe the first Alien movie with Sigourney Weaver was, I mean, even before that, I mean, you had like the Avengers, Emma Peel of the Avengers, that kind of thing. Like the tough, like beautiful, yet at the same time able to beat up rooms full of hardened criminal males. It hasn't been, I don't think Hollywood is doing that in order for the public to fall in love with these women so much as just try to like get the idea that women can be just as tough as men, and so it sort of masculinizes them while at the same time having them still be pretty. Like one of my favorite movies is don't tell me I don't even remember the name of it. Something Tomorrow. It's got, oh man, Stuff I Do to Myself. Tom Cruise is in it, and it's a movie about this kind of alien. It's a really badass, really good kind of alien. It's not just like they look like people, speak English, that kind of stuff. It's like completely non-human aliens are taking over the world. And the toughest, bravest, ass-kickingest person in the entire movie is this beautiful young woman who just, I mean, she's got a mind like a Navy SEAL on steroids, just completely fearless, just completely, I mean, just, it's just amazing. And it's unfortunate that because I've just called it one of my favorite movies, one of my favorite science fiction movies, that I don't even recall the name of it. Something for Tomorrow. And it's like there's lots and lots of this in Hollywood where they're trying to they're trying to instill into the mindset of the world that women are just as strong, just as brave as men are, which is bullshit on a general rule. Like Kill Bill, where you've got whatever, the bride, I don't think she even had a name, who is like killing an entire room of hardened criminals single-handedly. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. I mean, there have been tough women, but still, I don't think there have ever been women tough enough that they can take on 50 men in like hand-to-hand combat and defeat all of them. I mean, I've written blog posts about this back in the day when it was kind of more of a burning issue for me. So I don't think the public is supposed to really fall in love with these women and just admire and respect them and acknowledge that, wow, that woman is tougher than most men. And it makes them, they're so completely confident and fearless that, I mean, really, it's like a fairy tale. So let's see here. While making the male characters more submissive and uncertain about almost everything, well, that's not necessarily the case, because like the villains generally tend to be white men, like in action movies and so forth. The bad guy is still usually a man who is very certain about everything. You know, he's tough and bad and mean, and you know, he's not like insecure and stuff. Maybe a little bit, maybe sexually insecure or something, but still, he's got to be tough just so that the woman can defeat him and be even tougher than him. So, yeah, I think it's like propaganda. It's feminist propaganda, essentially. So nowadays, when I go for dates, I keep looking for women that are sure of themselves, but this is never the case, as women need men for certainty and reliability, because women are unstable in some ways. Well, women, just going with statistics as a general trend, they tend to be more insecure than men. Men tend to have more self-confidence than women. And so that's one way that nature has tried to ensure that men and women will hook up. I mean, men just desire the body of the woman. Women desire the strength and stability of the man. They're attracted to that. Women are attracted to strong, stable men who are good providers. Even though they might have their own career and all that, make more money than the guy, still instinctively from back in the Stone Age, they're just attracted to strong, stable men who will protect them and their children. And no amount of Hollywood propaganda is going to change that. So, yeah, I mean, and you shouldn't be deliberately seeking out a woman who really is stable and self-confident and so forth, unless maybe as a man you lack that and you need her to kind of fill in the gaps. But still, you're better off just accepting women as they are and just sort of just going with that. Gosh. Giving advice on women. Let's see this here. I'm kind of reviewing the question to make sure that I've done some semblance of justice to it. Have you had thoughts on how Hollywood wants the public to fall in love with women who are sure of themselves and know what they want and where they are going? Yeah, I'm not so sure that, they want you to admire and respect them without necessarily falling in love with them. Because like in Hollywood, to fall in love with a woman is kind of objectifying her. You're just turning her into like a sex object or something. So I think they might not even want you to fall in love with them. They just want you to like be in awe of how beautiful yet tough and fearless this woman is. And just get it into your head that all women can be this way, when of course they can't. Let's see. Making the male characters more submissive and uncertain about almost everything. That's more like TV commercials, maybe sitcoms, where the men are just kind of befuddled and the women are taking charge and the women know more than the man does and so forth. That's more of a TV commercial thing than like an action movie thing. It's true in what Edge of Tomorrow or whatever the movie was with Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise starts off as like this weaselly coward, and it's the woman who, he falls in love with her, and then she just kind of helps him to become also tough and fearless. So, that does happen. But, yeah, it's mainly just feminist propaganda, and it really does not fit in with reality very well. And so you're better off just ignoring Hollywood propaganda. Hollywood is tanking now anyway. Hollywood is in severe decline. And there's a certain amount of backlash coming back the other way where, the the female superhero, just fearless, tougher than men kind of movie is really getting a lot of backlash from the public, and they tend not to sell well. And so they're actually creating more politically incorrect kind of movies that are like the old-fashioned kind that are making more money. And that's essentially what it all boils down to in most cases. I mean, there are certain companies, corporations, or like donors to these companies and corporations that are willing to lose money for the sake of getting the propaganda out there. But yeah, it's there's been sufficient backlash against this blatant propagandizing, which nowadays it's like queer propaganda even more than like the absolutely tough, fearless, ass-kicking, beautiful female with the perfect hair and the makeup and the fingernails and everything, who still, with the perfect hair and the makeup and the fingernails, is still beating up rooms full of 50 male hardened criminals or aliens or whatever. So, thoughts on this? Yeah, thoughts on this, if you're looking for a woman, just look for women until you find one that resonates with you. And there you go. I mean, it's true. I mean, women in general, aren't as self-confident and so forth. They're more fearful, that kind of thing. So, you have to take that into consideration. You don't want just some butch, domineering female anyway, necessarily. Unless some guys just go for that because their mother was like that or something. And I guess I'm done. I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm done answering questions for today. It's less than 2 hours. That's reasonable. Less than 2 hours. I didn't even bother to count how many questions there were. Well, for all I know, it may have been a prime number of questions. But as I should always say at the beginning, but also you generally say at the end, if you have any questions you think I can answer, especially something regarding Dharma, Buddhism, early Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, especially meditation, that kind of thing, then feel free to ask, and no more than 3 questions per person, please. Like and subscribe if you have not done so already. Check out the URL links, including the books that I have for sale on Amazon, and be happy.